Ipragin looked over his datapad while he waited by the holographic communication sphere to be ready to give his report to Thrazen High Command. He once again inspected his uniform to make sure he was within regulations. As the communication sphere flickered to life, he snapped to attention and saluted the Supreme Commander, the 5 Grand Admirals, and the 5 Grand Strategos of the Army seated around the table. Inquisitor Ipragin, Senior Intelligence Officer, Ronic Sector Command, reporting as ordered, doing his best not to show just how nervous he was presenting a report before the High Command of the Thrazen Empire. "Be seated, Inquisitor," rumbled the voice of the Supreme Commander over the holographic sphere's audio device. "Yes, sir," Ipragin replied, taking a seat in front of the sphere. The Supreme Commander said, "We called this meeting to discuss an intel report sent by you and flagged high priority. There are some on the Council that doubt the veracity of this report." Grand Admiral Ipalan spoke up. "Do not take this as a slight on your abilities, Inquisitor Ipragin, but the High Command needs to clarify this report. We did not think it possible for the humans to field the numbers that you reported." The Grand Admiral continued, "If these numbers are accurate, then it will require shifting a significant portion of the fleets and army units." The Supreme Commander spoke up again. "We have also had reports of a buildup in the Terek system, but much smaller than the one in your report. Explain how this intel was gathered and give an updated report on the human activity in the Sumac system." "I hear and obey, Supreme Commander," Ipragin replied. "For the past 3 parlaks, we'd begun to pick up a decrease in the usual communications and ship traffic into the system. We ran diagnostics on our equipment and found no issues." Ipragin began. "It might not sound like much, but the source of the missing signals caught our attention." Ipragin paused to bring up an image in the holosphere before continuing. "This is a graph showing the sources of the signals we monitor. If you look at the last source, it's the radiation signature given off by the reactors on the civilian mining outpost. We use that signature as a baseline for the radiation output and natural signals given off by the system's star and orbiting bodies." Ipragin explained, "If we seem to get a spike that indicates increased activities by the humans, we can check against the baseline to see if the signals are just being magnified by stellar or background activity." Ipragin pointed to the time frame that coincided with 3 parlaks ago. "The radiation signatures spike and then begin to fade until they are gone. Checking against the other part of the baseline showed no stellar activity to cause that." Grand Strategos Tickless asked, "Couldn't they have just shut down the reactors or had an accident?" Ipragin brought up another image. "Humans' energy sources are far inferior to our own and give off more signatures than our own. This graph shows the shutdown of the reactors in the Eclarian system just prior to our invasion. They were trying to evacuate all their assets before we arrived. As I said, their energy sources are inferior to ours and take 5x the amount of time to shut down." Ipragin brought up another graph. "This shows the signature for a reactor we destroyed when we invaded the Neeg system. There was a massive burst of radiation at the moment of destruction. Neither of those shows up in our monitoring of the Sumac system." Ipragin points to the spike of the radiation signatures. These match previous readings of new reactors being brought online. Either the humans made a massive technological jump to improve their reactors, or they were masking the signal somehow. It was only a few rotations before we noticed some of our intelligence assets, both living beings and electronics, started going dark. This was enough to pique our curiosity, and we sent some of our cloaked reconnaissance probes to the system. We thought it was lost because we weren't getting any signals back and sent another one. So we sent a third, but gave it orders to return after 1 rotation of the planet the humans occupied. After the probe left the system, we started getting information back. The other 2 probes were still active but unable to transmit out of the system. Humans have found a way to block all artificial signals from leaving the system. Even our communications between our probes were restricted inside the system. That also explains our assets going dark, but we didn't know why they did this. So we sent the probe back to get close enough to change the orders of the other 2 probes to leave the system at preset times and transmit their data." Ipragin changed the image to one of the Sumac system, and the probe locations were marked. "We snuck one of the probes close enough to begin receiving information from our assets on the station. The next intel dump is when we received reports of the increased human activity and new construction on several habitable moons. It also provided the initial intel on the gathering fleet. At first, it was only a dozen warships, 3 capitals, and their support ships, but dozens were arriving over each parlak. One of my remaining assets on the station also reported large numbers of ground forces arriving and then being flown to one of the new bases. So far, it has counted the insignia of no less than 8 divisions, to use the human term. Previous intelligence reports have listed a human division to be 25,000 soldiers. Ipragin switched to a new screen. We received another probe signal before this meeting with updated information. We estimate the human fleet to be over 1,500 warships and several hundred other types of ships, mostly troop transports. Over 500 are capital ships. Ipragin checked his pad again before continuing. We've counted 5 supercarriers, 100 standard carriers, 200 battleship class, and about 200 of their heavy cruisers. The rest of the fleet is a mix of sub-capitals that humans classify as light cruisers, frigates, destroyers, and corvettes. Our current estimate has 1 supercarrier containing 500 strike craft, and carriers carry up to 150. The best estimate is 17,500 strike aircraft, but we do not know how many are for space combat, and if any are assigned for planetary support of the ground forces. The asset also updated human ground force numbers. 3 more divisions have arrived, 1 artillery, 1 of armored vehicles, and 1 mech. We do not know their actual strength. Current total number of ground forces is at least 200,000 troops. The members of the High Council looked alarmed. The Supreme Commander asked, "Do you have an idea of their target?" "We picked up increased reconnaissance activity in the Bullen system," Ipragin replied. He continued, "Our asset also picked up bits and pieces of information to support that system." "Balloon's system? That makes no sense. It has no strategic value," one of the Grand Strategos exclaimed. He was a recent addition to the High Council, and Ipragin had forgotten his name. Before Ipragin could reply, Grand Admiral Ipolon answered, "Not by itself, but it makes a good stepping-off point to other systems that would make effective staging grounds to then hit 7 significant worlds, both militarily and industrial." At this revelation, most of the members of the High Command looked either concerned or alarmed. "And what about the Terek system buildup?" the Supreme Commander asked. "After consulting with the intel staff monitoring the Terek system, we believe it's a distraction to keep our forces in that area." Discussion with my superiors came to the same result. Ipragin replied, "And why does the intelligence come to this conclusion?" Grand Admiral Ipolon asked. Ipragin changed the image in the globe to show scans of the Terek system. "The naval and army forces are much smaller, maybe 150 ships of all types near the 4th planet starbase. That includes troop transports," Ipragin continued. "Their attempts at preventing our reconnaissance of the system is not as good as it's been in the past. We think they want us to see them. They are dangling a force dangerous enough to take the Jakrant system, but not against the forces we have in the system and our fleets and armies in the area. But the human force building in the Sumact system outnumbers our total force in that sector 4x times over." Ipragin finished. Ipragin waited quietly as the High Command deliberated. Supreme Commander addressed Ipragin. "Normally, someone of your security level wouldn't be informed of these plans ahead of time. But we've determined this situation requires immediate updates on the intel, so you and only you will report directly to us, not through your superiors first. We are going to transfer the 1st, 3rd, and 8th fleets from the Jakrant system and the Lankardi systems to the Sumact system. The 2 more fleets will come from a more secure sector of the Empire. The 5 of the 6 army groups in the Jakrant system will be relocated as well." Admiral Ipolon spoke up. "We will be taking an indirect route to avoid detection. Besides monitoring the human buildup and notifying us when their offensive commences, you are to also look for any sign of detection of these movements." The next few rotations were a busy time for Ipragin, updating the latest intel on the human buildup and ensuring the movement of Thrazan forces wasn't detected. After discussions with High Command about the human forces attacking the Jakrant system, it was determined to be part of their misdirection ploy. Therefore, no reinforcements were sent there. Even after the Jakrant system fell, even the destruction of the 5th Fleet, along with the army guarding it, the High Command still waited and fortified the Sumact system. And then one rotation, the forces in the Sumact system just vanished. All the humans and assets were gone, and the system was empty. It was also rigged to explode after Thrazan forces entered the station. 2 ships and 383 ground troops were killed. All other human structures exploded right after that. The High Command assumed the humans discovered the forces waiting for them and withdrew entirely to avoid a Thrazan force counterattack. Ipragin was promoted for his actions during that period. They congratulated him for helping prevent the human offensive from succeeding with his work. It was 3 revolutions of Thrazen Prime later that Ipragan was captured by the humans when the Ronic sector fell. As a high-value prisoner, he was taken to the human homeworld for imprisonment and frequent interrogation. He assumed humans used tactics in interrogation as brutal as Thrazan interrogators did. After minimal resistance, he began freely answering their questions. It was after they had been going over all his communications with Thrazan High Command over his career that he decided to risk asking the question that had bothered him since the humans abandoned the Sumact system. "May I ask a question, Colonel Adams?" Ipragan requested. "You may," the colonel replied. "Thank you. 4 of what you call years ago, your invasion forces in the Sumact system just disappeared within a matter of days." The colonel replied, "Yes, I remember the operation. Where did they go?" "We never saw some of the divisions our spy reported in action after that. And we didn't come across a buildup in other areas that matched the number of ships," Ipragan asked. The colonel looked at his comrade. "Not like he's going to escape and tell his buddies, right?" The lieutenant colonel replied, "No, I think it's safe to tell him, and we've been dying to brag about it to people outside the know." The colonel returned his attention to Ipragan. With a grin, Colonel Adams replied, "They never existed, or at least most of them." Ipragan was confused and asked, "What do you mean?" The lieutenant colonel spoke up. "We took a page from a major conflict on Earth before we ever put a human in space." He continued, "They used deception to pin down enemy forces at the wrong location and keep from defending against the true invasion force. They even thought the true invasion was a feint, just like you did." Ipragan looked horrified. "But I saw the images of all the ships myself, and my asset saw the unit patches." Colonel Adams laughed again before speaking. "The ships were either empty hulls with only some having engines so you'd see them arrive. Others were disguised civilian ships that also brought in disassembled parts to build more fake warships." "And the troops?" Ipragan asked. The lieutenant colonel replied, "Oh, that was only a couple of companies of non-combat personnel. We knew about your spy, and Yakiri have always been horrible at telling humans they don't know apart. It was just the same 300 troops changing uniforms or division patches and boarding the station again. The actual unit never had any patches or identifying marks. We were just designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops after the original unit that handled the deception." "Fake? I was fooled by you," Ipragan replied. "My entire career was built on a lie, and I never figured it out." Colonel Adams replied, "It's probably better you didn't, or they might have imprisoned you." Looking miserable, Ipragan replied, "I would have probably been executed." With that realization, he was suddenly very glad he never found out, and that he was a prisoner of the humans if High Command ever did find out. Looking at the 2 humans, "You humans are sneaky bastards," Ipragan accused. At the same time, they both said, "Thank you," as if it was a compliment.